Welcome to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, of course, Dr. Bryan Laskin. Excited to be here talking about the great disconnect, the disconnect between dental patients and how they view dentistry, and of course, dental professionals and how we view dentistry. With me today, we have a fantastic guest. Thanks for being here. It's Shawn Hall, who's the CEO and founder of Sodium Systems LLC, an advanced dental diagnostics product manufacturer and designer. Sodium Systems invented the ability to repair digital X-ray sensors. And I know that this is a hot topic in dentistry, Shawn. I can just hear the dentists who are thinking of the times that they've had a digital X-ray sensor go bad. And so if you could tell me a little bit about Sodium Systems and how you got into repair for digital X-rays in dentistry.
Absolutely, Dr. Laskin. One, really happy to be here and get a chance to talk about this a bit. I mean, the origination of the company was with the intention of we're also a medical device manufacturer, so we make digital X-ray sensors. And in the process of looking at our first engineering designs for sensors and how they're built, we also came across just a couple of customers right off the bat that were customers and friends. And one of them in particular had a drawer full of broken Kodak sensors. And, he was just like, he's like, what's in these? He's like, I've got a drawer full of them. I just replace them. He never would do the trade-ins because they would only offer him like, $800 trade-in. And he always kind of held on to some hope that one day he'd be able to get some value out of them. And knowing what was inside of them, we're like, well, I mean, there's good odds that most of what's broken with these sensors is repairable. And he's like, well, Kodak always tells me it's unrepairable, or so, and Kodak's now not Kodak anymore. And I was like, well, if you think about the structure of how things are sold in dental, like one company makes the thing, and then in general, a supply house sells the thing. Well, the supply house can't really get to make any money again if you keep repairing the thing from the manufacturer. So, everyone gets to make more money if just no one ever fixes them. If you think about what would the automobile market be like if there was literally no AutoZone, no auto parts store. And the only way you could ever get your car fixed was be if it was under the manufacturer's warranty, and let's say they only gave you that 3-year, 36,000 miles. And then after that, transmission goes out, new car, lose a belt, new car, oil filter, we don't replace anything. It's you run it for 36,000 miles. If it breaks in that time, maybe we'll fix it a little bit. If not, new car. And so we started off by gutting one sensor, really taking a look at the internals, talking to some of our design and manufacturing counterparts. And then we started trying to produce OEM parts, which is hard to do since they don't exist, and come up with a mechanism for fixing nearly every sensor on the market. And, it was a very popular thing, especially very popular for a small company to get into, because there's a huge barrier between the average sales company and a dentist, which is why it's why the supply houses are so successful at what they do, is because they walk into your practice every month to fill that supply order, and you get used to seeing them every month. And so when you need something, they bring in their hardware technology rep or whatever. And a lot of times it just transitions from there. So, it was a really great thing for us to be able to do. And it allowed us to, find a place in the industry. And, as we go along, we try and repair more and more product. And I'd like to think that we've actually, since we started doing it in 2011, I'd like to think we made a pretty big dent in how the industry does business. Now they sell complete care plans. I mean, honestly, they're still not complete care plans. They still won't cover it if someone bites your sensor cable, or, which is a sensor cable getting bitten is just the obvious thing that's going to happen to a sensor, right? I mean, that's like saying you use the brakes on your car to stop. Therefore, anything that happens to your car, that can't possibly be fixed or repaired. So, we're trying to develop more processes in that. We've tried to develop, when we develop new products, when we bring sensors to market, we try and look at what breaks on other sensors and try and make more durable products within the limits of what you can engineer.
That's great. I mean, I think, it's not really in the the other companies that you're discussing. They're not in the repair business, right? For the technology. And so And I at Upgrade Dental, the educational platform that I'm part of, we have what's called the Growth Roadmap, which is a roadmap of every piece of technology in dentistry in the order that you should implement them. And the reason why I bring that up is that 1.1, the very first thing is digital x-rays. I feel like if you don't have digital x-rays, like you should hang up your handpiece. I think, and it's shocking to people that there are still film x-rays out there, but there are. But it's not that long ago that half the industry wasn't using digital sensors. And so this is kind of it's a cool spot that you're in where you're innovating from, filling a void that didn't exist. These should be repaired, but nobody was doing it. So I think it's
Right.
awesome that you kind of have found this niche and are doing it. It makes all the sense in the world. Like you said, I mean, brakes are going to go out on your car, right? You're
Right.
going to have a sensor that breaks. If you haven't already, then you just haven't been using x-ray sensors for that long, right? Frankly, I don't know of another place that is repairing digital x-ray sensors. So kudos to you. I mean, it must be just what barriers do you find? Are there certain sensors that are unrepairable versus ones that are repairable?
There's the old Suni sensors lasted a long time, but they were extremely difficult to repair because of how they were designed. So that was a weird crossroads. Like they didn't break very often, but also in how they were designed, it also made them pretty difficult to repair. And it's funny when you say like, nobody else repaired sensors. It's hilarious that we actually, I mean, there's probably like 2 competitors out there on the market now, and they were literally customers of ours. So they were like IT companies that, had customers, and they came to us and they were like, hey, because most doctors don't know you can get a sensor repaired. So I would say 95% of doctors don't get their sensors repaired because, what happens when something breaks? You call the guy that sold it to you. That person tells you, oh, yep, we'll send it in to us. We'll tell you if it's fixable. They always say it's not. And, so they send it into, big name X, and the company says it's not fixable. They get it back and they buy a new one. There really isn't any reason for you to go looking for a service that you don't expect to find. So, I mean, like when a television breaks these days, not a lot of people actually fix their television. They just get a new one if it's out of warranty. But there probably is a company out there that'll fix your TV, and it probably costs a fraction of the cost of a new one. But just kind of how the thought process goes. But yeah, it's a really bizarre industry. We do sensors now because that's components we were already really comfortable with. Some of the products that I think should be repaired that aren't, if we want to talk about, scope, then this is something we don't do yet, but should be done, is CREC systems, milling units. I mean, milling units are incredibly expensive. And the reason why repair is important, like, so if there's a reason why this conversation is important, other than the idea that, hey, if you have a broken sensor, someone can fix it. The reason why it's important is because if things can be repaired, things have value if you want to resell them. So right now you go out, you buy a $140,000 E4D unit, and we get doctors that come to us all the time trying to sell used equipment. And if they're like, oh, I've got this E4D unit, I've had it for a year and a half, I never used it, for whatever reason, they were never able to wind up that aspect of their practice. They just don't use it. It sits in a closet somewhere. They'll be like, well, what could you sell it for? And I'll tell them, 20 grand, maybe. And, I always preface it with, I'm about to make you really upset. And it's, if they're like, well, what would you pay for it? And I'd be like 8 grand, because more than likely it's going to sit in my warehouse, because the manufacturer won't pass on the warranty without some gigantic fee to the new owner. And because there isn't reliable service stations out there, that devalues the product immensely. Like, you can go out and buy a used car. True, if you buy it from a dealership and it's quote unquote certified, you pay a little more, maybe a 8% premium or something. But you'll buy a used car from a gentleman if you've driven it, everything seems to work, because you know that within reason, most of the things that go wrong with it, you can probably get fixed. It might cost you some money, but it's not going to cost you the whole car. And whereas with digital panos, 3D cone beam CTs, E4Ds, CREC units, basically, if the doctor who buys it used is kind of in a pickle where if it breaks, he lost whatever money he spent on it. So he basically has to buy it at a price point to where he's okay if 10, 11 months from now, it just breaks. And so if there were more OEM parts and more repairing in this industry, things would actually have value. You can sell a dental chair at a much higher value percentage wise to what you paid for it than you can sell these expensive 3D cone beam systems. And that should be very concerning, because when did that model change, right? I mean, the idea that you bought a chair and then that company continued to provide service, and you didn't have to have a service contract on your chair. When you needed service, you called the equipment rep, and they got a guy in there, and it was a pretty high hourly rate, but they got your chair up and running. Parts were fixed. It didn't cost you half of the chair cost. It cost you $1,000 or whatever, and maybe far less depending on who you've got for your service. And that made chairs last a lot longer. That also meant that when you sold your practice, the fact that you had dental chairs in there actually had value when you sold your dental practice. Now you sell your dental practice, technology has almost no value in the valuation of your practice, other than the fact that your patients are already comfortable with it and you've got software. But it's like, as things modernize, we're also stealing a lot of that equity value dentists were having in a dental practice. So, I mean, that's kind of where we see why there might be some importance in developing a repair industry is, for things like that, is trying to, people buy an E4D. Because the other thing is if there was a side market for E4Ds, if the used automotive market drives down the cost of new cars, it does. So when there's a bad model of car, or not necessarily bad, but maybe the customers aren't satisfied with it as they wanted, like the BMW i8 was a great example of this. You can go buy a BMW i8, which was sold for its new 160 grand. You can buy one in mint condition, $68,000. Because for whatever reason, the cars are, I had one, they're hard to park. People don't like the doors eventually. I mean, the car drives great and it looks cool. It's everything they advertise. It's just like, once you own one, it's kind of like owning a boat. The happiest 2 days of your life are when you buy it and you sell it. So, that's, but the fact that people make that it's what keeps that i8 new price, the sticker's higher than they sell them for a lot of times, because people can go out and buy a used one. And so that's what I'd like to see for dental is, dentists have been buying the same digital x-ray sensors for 20 years, literally identical technology. I just overheard someone the other day talking, they were like, oh, I upgraded my dental sensors and the image is better. And I asked them, I was like, what'd you upgrade from? And they upgraded from the platinum to the titanium. I'm like, it's the same sensor. It's like, look at the FDA release. It's the same pixel size. It's the same resolution. It's nearly an identical sensor. But, you buy something new, you feel like it's better.
Yeah. I mean, and you're hitting on kind of where I'm excited about the prospect of having repairability in dental technology is that, frankly, I don't think it's going to change the valuation of a practice. I think that is going to be a multiple of EBITDA, just like other businesses, right? But the other things I totally agree with you on. But also, one of the reasons why I'm excited when my TV breaks after 5 years is I know that it's going to be better, because there's innovation going on all the time when it comes to TVs, and it drove down the price. A flat panel TV like the one behind me, used to be 10 grand. Now it's like $200. I mean, it's ridiculously lower, right? And this is way better than one that cost 10 grand. And I think that if once repairability catches on for x-ray sensors, it's going to force the companies to come out with better sensors, because there are some companies that are doing that. And when they come, then it's like, if one breaks it, you'll feel, oh, great, I'll buy the cheaper, more, one with a better picture. It won't just be the same thing, right? And I think that is a huge driver of innovation. I mean, that's why we're on the iPhone 12 or 13 or whatever it is now, right? Well, the only reason why people upgrade is to get the newer features. And right now there's been sort of this plateau, so less people are upgrading. So they're trying to figure out new innovative ways, like Samsung's got the folding phone and stuff like that. And that's all driven because they want people to buy more phones, right? But who's the benefit? Really, the beneficiary is basically everybody. We have less cost, we've got more innovation. And the same thing is happening with phones, right? They're trying to make it so they're not repairable. And so when your phone smashes, right, and then you have a whole industry coming up, and there's like this cat and mouse game between the companies making them less repairable and then the people repairing them. And so I agree. I think it's vitally important, though, what you're doing to make things repairable. So appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a big drive. We'd like to see quality go up and prices come down. And that sounds strange because I'm a manufacturer, but I would also like because if we started going into a marketplace where quality of product actually mattered, then maybe we could stop having 50% of our budget be marketing, you know, like it is right now. Sirona has a 40% of Sirona's budget is marketing, which doesn't make any sense because they don't even sell their own product, they sell it through a supply house who's supposed to be selling it. And then the supply house has a 40% marketing budget. And so all that money keeps going to make more ads and whatnot, where then we don't care as much about the ads. So then they have to spend more money to make more ads. And then that money it's just going to more people working on Photoshop and less people actually designing a new piece of equipment that might actually make something better. One thing that phones have going for it that dental doesn't is the Android operating system. Whether you're an iPhone person or an Android person, iPhone people should be really happy that Android exists, because the fact that there's an Android operating system, so then your main competitor is Samsung. But what keeps Samsung honest is that other phone companies can make phones that have the Android operating system and are real competitors, because the one thing people won't change is software, right? Once they're comfortable with a piece of software, they won't change it. So if Android software only worked on Samsung, then Samsung and iPhone would just own the market. And I think that we'd be back at the Galaxy S2 still, and we'd be at the iPhone 2, and we'd have really terrible cameras. Because I see that happen in dental, right? I mean, we did a product group recently, and we were asking, because we were thinking about coming out with a sensor that's like 6 times the resolution of what's available now, and potentially we could sell it at the same price as like a DEXA sensor sells for. And at the end of it, the end question that the person we had a person asking the questions instead of someone from our company. They asked them, okay, so with all this in mind, would you be willing to change your imaging software to use this new product, to have 4 times the resolution on your Xrays, clearer Xrays? And even after 40 minutes of people complaining about how dissatisfied they were with their current products, as soon as they found out they'd have to change their imaging software, they're like, oh, well, we won't change our imaging software, but we don't see why it can't work in our current imaging software. And it's like, well, because the company that owns your imaging software also owns the sensor they sell you. So, it's like what Microsoft did for computers. Like, Microsoft may seem like an evil corporation, but they also made their operating system to where you can make any motherboard work on it. So that's why we have 10 different motherboard manufacturers, and why we have, 10 different video card manufacturers and all these different companies out there competing. If Microsoft had just been a hardware maker like Apple is, and it was just the two of them, computers would have staled out. The technology race would have slowed down to a crawl, because they could 100% control what you were going to buy. So that's the other thing. So we got to look at repairing things so there can be a good used market for dentists, which will stall out being forced to be in this constant rebuy cycle. The solution for the software thing, I don't have a solution for it. I mean, the solution would have to come from dental boards. Dental boards actually approve dental softwares in the end, because a dental software has to go through the FDA. Dental board could just say, you're not allowed to have a dental software if it doesn't accept, let's say, Twain sensors. Twain's a known protocol, right? And just say, hey, you're not allowed to have it if it doesn't do this, because we're not going to have this software out here that ties us into one particular sensor for the rest of our lives. Because it is like, people will buy a practice and they get a certain software, and then they just keep buying that. That company could do almost anything to them. It's like they can, if you're unhappy with your Comcast, what are you going to do, kind of deal. So
yeah, it's like I almost, in retrospect, it's going to look like I set you up by you saying that, because one of the things I'm currently working on right now is a standard development organization that I'm part of called Dental Standards Institute, and also a software platform that we developed called Tooth Apps. That's really about interoperability in dentistry and fixing those exact issues that we talked about, not just for imaging, but for interoperability. Because a big issue that I see is from my history with Opera DDS, and we had a product that would that writes back to medical history forms, right?
Yeah.
And the major platform that has 65% of the market in dentistry, even though you pay for the API access to that platform, won't allow you to write back to the medical history, which it puts patients at risk. And it's because they own platforms that compete, right? And so, what I'm saying is that's a much bigger issue than people realize in dentistry, and imaging is a piece of that. And so I'd love to have a conversation with you offline about how we can work together because that's, it's a combination of standardization and an application that we're kind of working on to address that.
I think that's extremely important. And I think it's going to become, what you're trying to do there is going to suddenly become much more important than people think in about 10 years. Because if they don't do something now, they're going to find out in 10 years how bad of decisions we made. Because I was just going over, I've been called a cloud denier. And it's not that I don't like cloud applications and so on and so forth. It's because my problem with the cloud isn't really a problem with the technology. It's a problem with the agreement you sign when you sign onto it. So to me, a cloud practice management software is closer to a lease of a literal physical facility than it is anything else. Because let's say Dentrix Ascend finally gets to, maybe they get to 50,000 users with current pricing. Microsoft right now is raising their pricing 20% on 365. So let's just say they just decide they get a bulk number of users. They've got good control over the industry. They just raise their prices 20% one year. What do? In the agreement, it says they're supposed to provide you your data if you want to leave. But in what format do they provide it to you? Is anyone able to get that format of whatever they give you back into some other piece of software? How long does it take? Would they have to engineer something to do it? It's a really big concern I don't think anyone sees. And it's not just the concept of a price increase, but literally it puts you in a position where where a company can treat you any way it wants. Because the reality is you can't walk away. And, I thought COVID was a great example of the potential hazards of this, is that, when a dental office shuts down for 6 months, it's kind of a bummer that they have to keep paying $1,500 a month for their practice management software, on the cloud or whatever. Or, what if a dentist retires but can't sell? It doesn't, a lot of times people sell their practices, but sometimes they don't. And you still have this obligation to have patient records for 6 years, right? So do you have to keep paying your cloud service provider for 6 years so you have access to it? How does that work? A gentleman I know, he bought a practice where the doctor had been retired for or had passed away, and he didn't buy the practice till 2.5 years later. And they pulled an old server out that had Dentrix and Dexis on it, and he was able to get the patient data and everything. And the daughter had held on to it, and so that worked. But I was like, well, how does that work? With a cloud solution, does the estate keep paying the cloud? At that point, the dentist might not care so much, but his estate might, his wife or, children. And so, I think this isn't really being looked at. Like I wouldn't, I have 2 offices. I wouldn't do a month-to-month rent contract for my business facility. And I think about that. I've read all of the, or I've read at least 3 of the major contracts, and I can't see anything in there that protects the users from any type of price increases.
I agree with everything you said, except nobody's working on it. Because at Dental Standards Institute, we're literally working on what we call ODIN, the Oral Data Set Interoperability Network, that would directly address this. Because the patient, the data is owned by the patient. The dental office is the steward of the data. So I believe that data should be free access to patients and to practices. If you switch from one practice management software to another, you should be able to just push a button and have all the critical information transfer over, or like you're saying, download it and store it, whatever you want to. Obviously it has to be secure, right? But
right,
it should be open and free access for patients. That mobility of the data is way more important, I think, particularly for some of the, and it's getting worse rather than better in the industry with the switch to cloud systems, which Like that is something we're actively working on a daily basis right now. So I hopefully the solution will be here in 10 months. So that in 10 years it won't be a big issue, right?
Well, that'd be great because that's because sometimes people ask me what the solution is as if a technology provider can solve it, and I'm like, this needs to be policy. It basically because I could make my software to where the database is easy to move and run, but and the solution wouldn't even have to be that difficult. It's literally okay if you build a practice management software, your database structure has to follow this structure.
Yeah, we're developing what's called the Odin Exchange, which it doesn't matter what your database structure is, as long as you tie into the interoperability network, right? So it'd be easy for anybody who has a system architect to plug into it. So
Right.
yeah, so I mean, I look forward to continuing the conversation on that because I think it's we went from something that I didn't know much about, which is we're repairing X-ray sensors, which is vital to the industry, to something that I'm extremely passionate about, which is data integrity and mobility. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad we got there because I really see the things as really all a part of the same philosophy that, there's, as a person who's selling to dentists, I think that there is plenty of money to be made providing a really good quality product, really good services. And there doesn't need to be a requirement that we have price fixing, that we have customers locked into solutions they're not really happy with. I just don't believe that's necessary. And the example is out there everywhere. I mean, a patient can walk away from a dentist anytime they want, but good dentists tend to keep their patients for life. Or, there's some patients that are, hard for anyone to keep, but which is true of customers too. It's just but the concept is that, doing a good job is all it takes, really is all it should take to have a successful, profitable business. And the things like what you're doing are going to allow more companies to provide solutions where, like you said, having that Odin exchange, that'd be great. Software developers could actually get into the game because some of the biggest fears for a dental practice is really, well, can I even get my data over to this new solution? And they shouldn't have to face that fear. Like if you're unhappy with the solution you've got, or if it's driving you to have to pay a lot of money for things that you don't want to have to pay for, you shouldn't feel basically shackled to it.
100%. Yeah. And I think it chokes innovation. Like you said, Apple and Samsung, Microsoft and Apple. I mean, the reason that's why there's been innovation in the categories. And I think that's why there hasn't been a lot of innovation in dental technology, the software, like in the practice management software arena and the, really development of some tools that just should exist that don't. That's why I think, when you're talking about marketing, if you think about, I don't know what Apple's marketing budget is, but their profitability is insane. Like, Scott Galway from NYU says they're the only company in the history that has the margins of Ferrari and the volume of Toyota. So they're doing something right? Which is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, they're a great company. Bill Gates saw that. He bought 20% of them in the late 90s or something. But I think, we're definitely 100% on the same page. And it's just that, we have to create services that create more freedom for dentists. Cause I think that can also go a long way to making dentists happier in their practice, because I think all these little things like, just being upset at Comcast, I don't have another internet solution for my business here. They took out my internet for 6 hours yesterday. And that doesn't seem like it should affect your life, but it was something to be irritated about, that I also felt more frustration than I should have. And that more frustration came from the fact that I knew, doesn't matter how irritated I am, I have to keep paying them because there's no other option, And I think anytime people feel like that, they can really take a lot of that, especially if you consistently feel like that with a lot of products that you have to use, you can really start to lose a lot of joy in the whole go into the office thing. So.
Oh, completely. I completely agree. Well, Shawn, thank you very much for being on the podcast. Appreciate it. And look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely, Dr. Laskin. Thank you so much.